Chapter 13 The Trap of the White Sphinx. About 8 or 9 in the morning, I came to the same sea of yellow metal, in which I had viewed the world upon evening of my travel. I thought of my hasty conclusions upon that evening, and could not refrain from laughing bitterly at my confidence. Here was the same beautiful scene, the same abundant foliage, and the same splendid palaces and magnificent ruins, the same silver river running between its fertile banks. The grey robes of the beautiful people moved hither and thither among the trees. Some were bathing in exactly the same place where I saved Duenna, and that suddenly gave me a keen stab of pain. In light blots upon the landscape rose the Clopas above the ways to the underworld. I understood now that all the beauty of the overworld people covered. Very pleasant was their day, as pleasant as day of the cattle in the field. Like the cattle, they knew of no enemies, provided against no needs. At their end was the same. I grieved to think how brief the dream of the human intellect had been. It had become suicide. It had set itself steadfastly towards comfort and ease, a balanced society with security and permanency as its watchword. It had attained its hopes, to come to this at last. Once life and property must have reached almost absolute safety. The rich had been assured of his wealth and comfort, the toiler assured of his life and work. No doubt, in that perfect world there had been no unemployment problems, no social question left unsolved, and a great quiet followed. It is law of nature we overtook, and intellectual versatility is the comprehensive for change, danger, and trouble. An animal perfectly in harmony with its environment is a perfect mechanism. Nature never appeals to intelligence until habitat and instinct are useless. There is no intelligence where there is no change, and no need of change. Only those animals partake of intelligence that have to meet a huge variety of needs and dangers. So, as I see it, the upper world man had drifted towards this feeble pettiness, and the underworld were mechanical industry. But that perfect state had lacked one thing, even for mechanical perfection: absolutely permanency. Apparently, as time went on, the feeding of the underworld, however, it was effected and become disjointed. Mother Necessity, who had staved off for a few thousand years, came back again, and she began below. The underworld, beginning in contact with machinery, which, however perfect, still needs some little thought outside habit, and probably retained performance rather more initiative, if less of every other human character than the upper world, and when other meat failed them, they turned to the old habit and hitherto forbidden. So I say I saw it in my last view of the world of 800 and 2701. It may be as wrong an explanation as mortal wit could invent. It is how the thing shaped itself to me, and as that I give it to you. After the fatigues, excitements, and terrors of the past days, and in spite of my grief, this seat and tranquil view and warm sunlight were very pleasant. I was very tired and sleepy, and soon my theorizing passed into dozing. Catching myself at that, I took my own hint. Spreading myself up upon the turf, I had a long and refreshing sleep. I woke a little before sunset. I now felt safe again, being caught napping my murlocs and stretching myself. I came on down the hill towards the White Sphinx. I had my crowbar in one hand, and the other hand placed with my matches in my pocket. And now came the most unexpected thing. As I approached the pedestal of the Sphinx, I found the bronze door valves were open. They had slid down into grooves. At that I stopped short of them, hesitating to enter. Within was a small apartment, on which a raised place in the corner of this was a time machine. I had the small levers in my pocket, so here, after all my elaborate preparations for the siege of the White Phoenix, was a meek surrender. I threw my iron bar away, almost sorry not to use it. A sudden thought came into my head as I stooped towards the portal. For once, at least, I grasped the mental operations of the Morlocks. Suppressing a strong inclination to laugh, I stepped through the bronze frame and up to the time machine. I was surprised to find it had been carefully oiled and cleaned. I had suspected since that the Morlocks had even partially taken it to pieces while trying in their dim-wit way to grasp its purpose. Now as I stood and examining it, finding pleasure in the mere touch of the contrivance, the thing I had expected to happen. The bronze panels suddenly slid up and struck the frame with a clank. It was in the dark, trapped, so the Morlocks thought. At that I chuckled gleefully. I could almost already hear their murmuring laughter as they came towards me. Very calmly I tried to strike the match. I had only to fix on the levers and depart them like a ghost, but I overlooked one little thing. The matches were of that abominable kind that light only on the box. You may imagine how my calm vanished, and the little brutes were close upon me. One touched me. I made a sleeping blow in the dark at them with the levers, and began to scramble into the saddle of the machine. Then came over one hand upon me, and then another. Then I simply to fight against their pristine fingers for my levers, and at the same time feel for studs over at which these fitted. One, indeed, they almost got away from me as it slipped from my hand. I had to butt my in the dark with my head. I could hear the Morlock's skull ring. To recover it, it was a nearer thing than the fight in the forest, I think, this last scramble. But as the last lever was fixed and pulled over, the clinging hand slipped from me. The darkness presently fell from my eyes. I found myself in the same grey light and tumult I have already described. Chapter 14. The Future Vision. I have already told you of the sickness and confusion that comes with time traveling, and this I was not seated properly in the saddle, but sideways and in an unstable fashion. For an indefinite time I clung to the machine as it swayed and vibrated, quite unheeded how I went, and when I brought myself to look at the dials again, I was amazed to find where I had arrived. One dial records days, another thousands of days, another millions of days, another thousands of millions. Now, instead of reversing the levers, I had pulled them over so far as to go forward with them, and when I came to look at these indications, I found that the thousand handheads was sweeping around as fast as the second's hand of a watch into futurity. As I drove on, a particular change crept over the appearance of things. The palpitating grayness grew darker. Then, though I was still traveling with prodigious velocity, the blinking succession of day and night, which was as usually undistinctive as a slower pace, returned, and grew more and more marked. This puzzled me very much at first. The alternation of night and day grew slower and slower, and so did the passage of the sun across the sky until they seemed to stretch through centuries. At last, a steady twilight brooded over the earth, a twilight only broken now and then when a comet glared across the darkening sky. The band of light that had indicated the sun had long since disappeared, for the sun had ceased to set. It simply rose and fell in the west. It grew ever broader and more red. All trace of the moon had vanished. The circling of the stars growing slower and slower, and given place to creeping points of light. At last, some time before I stopped, the sun, red and very large, halted motionless upon the horizon, a vast dome glowing with a dole of heat, and now and then suffering a momentary extinction. At one time it had for a very little while glowed more brilliantly again, and then it speedily reverted to its sullen red heat. I perceived by this slowing down of its rising and setting that the work of the tidal drag was done. The earth had come to rest with one face to the sun, even as our own time the moon faces the earth. Very cautiously, for I remembered my former headlong fall, I began to reverse my motion. Slower and slower went the circling dials until thousands one seemed motionless, and daily one was no longer a mere mist upon its scale. Still slower until the dim outlines of the desolate beach grew visible. I stopped very gently and sat upon the time machine. Looking around, the sky was no longer blue. Northeastward it was inky black, and out of the blackness shone brilliantly a steadily and pale white stars. Overhead it was a deep Italian red and starless, and eastward, it grew brighter to a growing scarlet where, cut by horizon, lay a huge hole of the sun, red and motionless. The rocks about me were a harsh reddish color, and all the trace of life that I could see at first was intensely green vegetation that covered every projecting point on the southeastern face. It was the same rich that one sees on forest moss or on the lichen in caves. Plants which, like these, grew with perpetual twilight. The machine was standing on a sloping beach. The sea stretched away to the southwest, to rise into sharp, bright horizon against the wan sky. There were no breakers and no waves, for not a breath of wind was stirring. Only a slight oily smell rose and fell like a gentle breathing, and showed that the eternal sea was still moving and living. And along the margin, where the water sometimes broke, was a thin incrustation of salt, pink under the lucrid sky. There was a sense of oppression in my head, and I noticed that I was breathing very fast. The sensation reminded me of my only experience of mountaineering, and from that I judged the air were to be more rarefied than it is now. For away up the desolate slope, I heard a harsh scream and saw a thing like a huge white butterfly go slanting and fluttering up into the sky and circling, disappear over some low hillocks beyond. The sound of its voice was so dismissal that I shivered and seated myself more firmly upon the machine. Looking round me again, I saw that quite near that I had taken to be a reddish mass of rock was moving slowly towards me. Then I saw the thing was really a monstrous crab-like creature. Can you imagine a crab as large as a yonder table, with as many legs moving slowly and uncertainly as its big claws swaying, its long antennae like Carter's whips waving and feeling, and its stalk eyes gleamed at you on either side of its metallic front. Its back was congregate and ornamental with ungainly bosses, and the greenish incrustation blotched it here and there. I could see the many palps of its complicated mouth flickering and feeling as it moved. As I stared at the sinister apparition crawling towards me, I felt a tickling on my cheek, as though a fly had lighted there. I tried to brush it away with my hand, but it was a moment in return, and almost immediately came another by my ear. I struck at this, and caught something thread-like. It was drawn swiftly out of my hand, like a frightful qualm. I turned and saw that I had grasped the antennae of another monstrous crab that stood just behind me. Its evil eyes were wriggling on their stalks. Its mouth was all alive with appetite, and its vastly ungainly claws smeared with algae slime, where, descending upon me, in a moment my hand was on the lever, and I placed a month between myself and these monsters. But I was still on the same beach, and I saw them distinctly now as soon as I stopped. Dozens of them, seeming to be crawling here and there in somber light among the foliated sheets of intense green. I cannot convey the sense of abominable desolation that hung over the world. The red eastern sky, the northward blackness, The salt Dead Sea. The stony beach crawled with these foul, slow-stirring monsters. The uniform, poisonous-looking green of the lichen plants. The thin air that hurts one's lungs. All contributed to an appalling effect. I moved on 100 years, and there is the same red sun, a little larger, a little duller, and the same dying sea, and the same chill air, and the same crowd of earthly crustaceans creeping in and out among the green-weed and red rocks. And in the western sky I saw a curved pale line, a vast new moon. So I traveled, stopping ever and again, in great strides of 1,000 years or more, drawn on by a mystery of Earth's fates. Watching with a strange fascination, the sun grew larger and duller in the western sky, and the life of the old Earth ebbed away. At last, more than 30 million years hence, a huge red-hot dome of the sun had come to obscure nearly a tenth part of the darkening heavens. Then I stopped once more, for a crawling multitude of crabs had disappeared, and the red beach, save for its livid green liverworts and lichens, seemed lifeless, and now it was flecked with white. A bitter cold assailed me. Rare white flakes even again came ebbing down. To the northeastern, a glare of snow lay under the starlight of the sable sky, and I could see an undimling crest of hillocks, pinkish white. There were fringes of ice along the sea margin, with drifted masses farther out, but again the expanse of salted ocean, all bloody under the earthern sunset, was still unfrozen. I looked about me to see if there were any traces of animal life remained. A certain indefinable appreciation still kept me in the saddle of the machine, but I saw nothing moving in the earth, sky, or sea. The green slime on the rocks alone testified that life was not extinct. A shallow sandbank had appeared in the sea, and water had receded from the beach. I fancied I saw some black object flopping upon its bank, but it became motionless as I looked at it, and I judged that with my eye had been deceived, and that the black object was merely a rock. The stars in the sky were intensely bright, and seemed to me to twinkle very little. Suddenly I noticed that the circular westward outline of the sun had changed, that had a concavity, a bay, that appeared in a curve. I saw this grow larger. For a minute perhaps I stared aghast at this blackness that was creeping over the day. Then I realized that an eclipse was beginning. Either the moon or the planet Mercury was passing across the sun's disk. Naturally, at first, I took it to be the moon, but there was much to incline me to believe that what I really saw was the transit of an inner planet passing very near to the earth. Darkness grew apace. A cold wind began to blow in freshening gusts from the east, and the showering white flakes in the air ceased in number. From the edge of the sea came a ripple and a whisper. Beyond these lifeless sounds, the world was silent. Silent? It would be hard to convey all the stillness of it, all the sounds of man, the bleating of sheep, the cries of bird, hum of insects, the stir that makes the background of our lives. All that was over. All the darkness thickened. The ebbing flakes grew more abundant, dancing before my eyes. The cold in the air grew more intense. At last, one by one, swiftly, one after another, the white peaks of the distant hills vanished into blackness, and the breeze rose to a moaning wind. I saw the black central shadow of the eclipse sweeping towards me. Another moment, the pale stars were visible. All else was rayless obscurity. The sky was absolutely black. A horror of this great darkness came to me, the cold that smote to my marrow, and the pain I felt in breathing overcame me. I shivered, and a deadly nausea seized me. Then, like a red-hot bow in the sky, appeared the edge of the sun. I got off the machine to recover myself. I felt giddy and incapable of facing the return journey. As I stood sick and confused, I saw again the moving thing upon the shoal. There was no mistake now that it was a moving thing. Against the red water of the sea, It was a round thing, the size of a football perhaps, or it may be bigger. The tentacles trailed down from it. It seemed black against the weathering, blood-red water, and it was hopping fitfully out. And then I felt I was fainting, but a terrible dread of laying helpless in that remote and awful twilight sustained me while I clambered upon the saddle. Chapter 15. The Time Traveler's Return. So I came back. For a long time I must have been insensible upon the machine. The blinking sensation of days and nights had resumed. The sun got golden again, the sky blue. I breathed with greater freedom. The fluctuating contours of the land ebbed and flowed. The hands spun backward upon the dials. At last I saw again the dim shadows of houses, and evidence of decent humanity. These too changed and passed, and others came. Presently, when the million dial was at 0, I had slackened speed. I began to recognize our own pretty and familiar architecture. The thousands hand ran back to the starting point. The night and day flapped slower and slower. Then the old walls of the laboratory came round me. Very gently now, I slowed the machine down. I saw one little thing that seemed odd to me. I think I have told you that when I set out before, my velocity became very high. Mrs. Watchett had walked across the room, traveling, as it seemed to me, like a rocket. As I returned, I passed again that minute when she traversed the laboratory, and now her every motion appeared to be the exact inversion of her previous ones. The door at the lower end opened. She glided quietly up the laboratory, back foremost, and disappeared behind the door which she had previously entered. Just before I seemed to see Hilary for a moment, but he passed like a flash. Then I stopped the machine and saw about me again the old familiar laboratory, my tools, my appliances, just as I had left them. I got off the thing very shakily and sat down upon my bench. For several minutes I trembled violently. Then I became calmer. Around me was my old workshop again, exactly as it had been. I might have slept there, and the whole thing had been a dream. And yet, not exactly. The thing had started from the southeast corner of the laboratory. It had come to rest again in the northwest, against the wall where you saw it. That gives you the exact distance from my little lawn to the pedestal of the White Phoenix, into which the Morlocks had carried my machine. For a time, my brain went stagnant. Presently, I got up and came through the passage here, limping because my heel was so painful, and feeling sorely begrimed. I saw the pale malt guillotine on the table by my door. I found the date was indeed today, and looking at the timepiece, I saw the hour was almost 8 o'clock. I heard your voices and the clatter of plates. I hesitated, I felt so sick and weak. Then I sniffed good wholesome meat, and opened the door on you. You know the rest. I wash and dine, and now I'm telling you the story. Chapter 16. After the story. I know, he said, after a pause. All this will be absolutely incredible to you, but to me the one incredible thing is that I am here tonight in this old familiar room, looking into your friendly faces and telling you these strange adventures. He looked at the medical man. No, I cannot expect you to believe it. Take it as a lie or prophecy. I say I dreamed it in the workshop. Consider I have speculated upon these destinies of our race until I have hatched this fiction. Treat my assertion of its truth as a mere stroke of art to enhance its interest, and taking it as a story. What do you think of it? He took up his pipe and began, in his old accustomed manner, to tap with it nervously upon the bars of the grate. There was a momentary stillness. Then the chairs began to creak and shoes to scrape against the carpet. I took my eyes off the time traveler's face, and looked round at his audience. They were in the dark, and little spots of color swam before them. The medical man seemed absorbed in the contemplation of our host. The editor was looking hard at the end of his cigar. The sixth, the journalist, fumbled with his watch. The others, as far as I remember, were motionless. The editor stood up with a sigh. What a pity it is not a writer of stories, he said, putting his hand on the time traveler's shoulder. Well, don't you believe it? Well, I thought not. The time traveler turned to us. Well, where are their matches? He said. He lit one and spoke over his pipe, puffing. "I tell you the truth, I hardly believe it myself," and yet his eye fell with the mute inquiry upon the withered white flowers upon the little table. And then he turned over the hand holding his pipe, and I saw he was looking at some half-healed scars on his knuckles. The medical man rose, came to the lamp, and examined the flowers. "The Gudetium's odd," he said. The psychologist leant forward to see, holding out his hand for a specimen. "I'm hanged if it isn't a 1:15, said the journalist. "How should we get home?" "Plenty of cabs at the station," said the psychologist. "It's a curious thing," said the medical man, "but I certainly don't know the natural order of these flowers. May I have them?" The time traveler hesitated suddenly. "Certainly not." "Where did you really get them?" said the medical man. The time traveler put his hand to his head. He spoke like he was one trying to keep hold of an idea that eluded him. "They were put into my pocket by Wenna when I traveled into time." He started around the room. "I'm damned if it's all gone. This room and you and the atmosphere of every day is too much for my memory. Did I ever make a time machine, or a model of a time machine, or was it only a dream? They say life is a dream, a precious poor dream at times, but I can't stand another that won't fit. It's madness. And where did the dream come from? I must look at the machine, if there is one." He caught up the lamp swiftly and carried it, flaring red, through the door into the corridor. We followed him. There, in the flickering light of the lamp, was the machine, sure enough, squat, ugly, and askew. The thing of brass, ebony, irony, and translucent gleaming quartz, solid to the touch. For I put out my hand and felt the rail of it, and with brown spots and smears upon the ivory, and bits of grass and moss upon the lower parts, and one rail bent awry. The time traveler put the lamp down on the bench, ran his hand along the damaged rail. "It's all right now," he said. "The story I told you was true. I'm sorry to have brought you out here in the cold." He looked up the lamp, and in absolute silence we returned to the smoking room. We came into the hall with us and helped the editor on with his coat. The medical man looked into his face and, with certain hesitation, told him he was suffering from overwork, in which he laughed hugely. I remember from him standing in the open doorway, bawling good night. I shared a cab with the editor. He thought the tale a goody lie. For my own part, I was unable to come to a conclusion. The story was so fantastic and incredible, the telling so credible and somber. I lay awake most of the night thinking about it. I determined to go the next day and see the time traveler again. I was told he was in the laboratory, and being on easy terms in the house, I went up to him. The laboratory, however, was empty. I stared for a minute at the time machine, and put out my hand and touched the lever. At that, the squat, symmetrical-looking mass swayed like a bow shaken in the wind. Its instability startled me extremely, and I had a queer reminiscence of the childish days when I used to be forbidden to meddle. I came back through the corridor. The time traveler met me in the smoking room. He was coming from the house. He had a small camera under one hand and a knapsack under the other. He laughed when he saw me, and gave me an elbow to shake. "I'm frightfully busy," he said, "with that thing in there." "But it is not some hoax," I said. "Do you really travel through time?" "Really, I truly do." And he looked frankly into my eyes. He hesitated. His eyes wandered about the room. Only 1.5 hours, he said. "I know why you came, and it's awfully good of you. There's some magazines here. If you'll stop to lunch, I'll prove you this time traveling up to the hill, specimens and all, if you'll forgive my leaving you now." I consented, hardly comprehending when the full importance of his words, and he nodded and went on down the corridor. I heard the door of the laboratory slam. I seated myself in a chair and took up a daily paper, and what he was going to do before lunchtime. Then suddenly I remembered by the advertisement that I promised to meet recharging the publisher at 2. I looked at my watch and saw that I could barely save the engagement. I got up and went down the passage to tell the time traveler. As I took hold of the handle of the door, I heard an exclamation, oddly translucent in the end, and a click and a thud. A gust of air whirled around me as I opened the door, and from within came the sound of broken glass falling on the floor. The time traveler was not there. I seemed to see a ghostly, indistinct figure sitting in a swirling mass of black and brass for a moment. A figure so transparent that the bench behind, with its sheets and drawings, was absolutely distinct. But this phantasm vanished as I rubbed my eyes. The time machine was gone, save for a substance stir of dust. Further, end of the laboratory was empty. A pane of sunlight and apparently had just blown in. I felt an unreasonable amazement. I knew that something strange had happened, and for a moment could not distinguish what the strange thing might be. As I stood staring, the door into the garden opened, and the manservant appeared. We looked at each other. Then ideas began to come. Has Mr. gone out that way? Said I. No, sir. No one has come out this way. I was expecting to find him here. At that I understood. At the risk of disappointment, Richardson I stayed on, waiting for the time traveler, waiting for the second, perhaps till stranger story and the specimens and photographs he would be bringing with him. But I am beginning now to fear that I must wait a lifetime. The time traveler vanished 3 years ago, and as everyone knows now, he never returned. Epilogue. One cannot choose to wonder, will he ever return? It may be that he swept back into the past and fell among the blood-drinking, hairy savages of the age of unpolished stone, into the abyss of the Cretaceous Sea, or among the grotesque saurians and huge reptilian brutes of Jurassic times. He may even now, if I may use the phrase, be wandering on some theological hunted oilodic coral reef, or beside the lonely, salty seas of the Triassic Age, or if he go forward into one of the near ages, in which men are still men, but with the riddles of our own time answered, and its wearisome problems solved, into the manhood of the race. For I, for my own part, could not think these later days a weak experiment, fragmentary theory, and mutual discord, or indeed man's accumulating time. I say, for my own part, he, I know, for the question had been discussed among us long before time machine was made, though that cheerlessly of the advancement of mankind, and sought in the glowing pile of civilization only a foolish heaping that must inevitably fall back upon and destroy its makers in the end. If that is so, it reminds us to live as though it were not so. But to me, the future is still blank and black, as is a vast ignorance, lit a few casual places in my memory of his story, and I have by me, for my comfort, 2 strange white flowers, shriveled now, and brown and flat and brittle, to witness that even when mind and strength are gone, gratitude and a mutual tenderness still lived on in the heart of man. The end.